We've seen prisons fall to bursting with apparently no plan to address that. We've seen people being told not to arrest, people being told to release early, and we've seen trial waiting times going back years and conviction rates being hit accordingly. So the criminal justice system has been decimated over the last 15 years.
Again, Adam Bolton here. We're talking about the disturbances and the consequences of them that we've seen this summer. And of course, for Keir Starmer, it was by no means the first time he'd had to confront such issues. He was Director of Public Prosecutions back in 2011 when there was civil unrest following an incident in Tottenham. One of his colleagues at the Crown Prosecution Service was Patrick Stevens, who joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you see any change in the attitude which Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister is taking to that he took as Director of Prosecutions?
Well, apart from the fact that I think he's able to coordinate at a higher level, I think the approach is very consistent with that he took in 2011 and appears to be having a similarly effective response. I think that everyone understands that you cannot necessarily arrest your way out of problems forever, but that a criminal justice response, and more importantly, an effective and swift criminal justice response, is a critical part of any response in restoring public order in such situations. So I think he's seen that has been a tried and tested approach. I think that the review of the 2011 riots concluded that was an effective approach, and I think that he's done that very well. He immediately got on with the police, got them to take a national response where they might otherwise have been regional, and made sure that resources were available in difficult circumstances, and then moved on to working with the Crown Prosecution Service and the courts to ensure that they could hold up their part of the criminal justice system. And I think that we've seen a very impressive response from the entire criminal justice system that he has played a part in helping to coordinate and lead.
A lot of people may feel, well, why can't we have similar sort of effective justice for other crimes?
Well, I'm sure that they may well feel that, and I think not least many in the government and many in the legal profession would say that they would like to have had greater investment in the criminal justice system over the last few years, but that's not been the case. We've seen prisons fall to bursting with apparently no plan to address that. We've seen people being told not to arrest, people being told to release early, and we've seen trial waiting times going back years and conviction rates being hit accordingly. So the criminal justice system has been decimated over the last 15 years. And whilst, of course, that is a long-term, that needs a long-term response to address that, this was an emergency situation and it was dealt with as an emergency. People have stepped up to the plate and gone way beyond their normal remits in terms of the amount of time and effort they've had to put in, working no doubt nights and weekends. And the response from the police has been nothing sort of heroic. I mean, I have to say that having faced the traumas there must have been in Southport for the original event, to then be subject to attack by people who are complaining about that must be a particularly upsetting situation to be in. And the response and frankly, I think the tolerance levels that they have shown and the professionalism has been exemplary.
Do you think the Prime Minister was right not, given, as you say, that the police were under intense pressure and demands on their time around the country, why didn't Sir Keir Starmer call in the army?
Well, I think first and foremost, Keir Starmer is someone who passionately believes in the rule of law. He passionately believes in making things work. And that's what he went out and did. And within a very short space of time, it seems that it has been effective. So I'm sure I was just hearing your conversation with Lord Heseltine about two-tier policing. Well, I think that conversation would have been slightly more stark if Keir Starmer had called in the army. And he's someone who doesn't overreact to events. He deals with them methodically, calmly, and strategically. And it seems to have worked very well.
You raised the question of the two-tier policing. Do you think there's any truth in the matter?
None whatsoever. I think I couldn't agree with Lord Heseltine more on his points about the reasons why this is being done. And frankly, not that it's my remit to be disappointed with some senior politicians other than Mr. Farage who are making these points. But I'm disappointed in some more mainstream politicians who might also be peddling that same line. I think the evidence speaks for itself, and it speaks loud and clear. We have seen people from both sides of the argument be arrested swiftly, be prosecuted for serious offences, even though some might argue that they were intensely provoked or subject to attack by another section of the community. Despite that, they have been treated as others, and the courts are saying that there is very little mitigation, if any, for people that involve in such violence. And we've seen people on both sides of this argument going to prison very swiftly for long periods of time. Ironically, I think longer term, the bigger argument that will be had about two-tier policing is when people look at other arguably more peaceful protesters going to prison for environmental protests for long periods, whereas people who've rioted have gone for slightly less. I see that argument emerging, but that doesn't necessarily fit with Mr. Farage's agenda.
So Keir Starmer obviously has used his expertise in dealing with the immediate law and order issues. Does the Keir Starmer, do you think, have the capacity to deal with what I was really talking to Michael Heseltine about, rebuilding communities?
I have no doubt that the Keir Starmer I know does, and I think that if one looks at the manifesto on which they've been elected, then I was very interested in learning from Lord Heseltine that his response to this was an issue of devolution. Well, I think that features very heavily in the priorities that Labour were elected upon, extending the devolution exactly as Lord Heseltine was saying needs to be done. And so I think even before we got to a position of discussing riots, it was Keir Starmer's passion and Keir Starmer's manifesto agenda to ensure that power is devolved, that power is more open and transparent. These are features that have cut through all of his working life, particularly can give endless examples of how he brought that to bear on the Crown Prosecution Service. But I also think there's the wider point that we have seen and heard from Keir Starmer before his election, but even more, I think, since his election, and that is to try and restore trust in politics. Now, that's an enormous ask in more recent years, but I believe a huge part of the underlying resentment and issues that cause people to behave in ways like this comes from a lack of trust in our politics and our politicians. And I believe that irrespective of the riots, that was already recognised and seen as a primary task for this Labour government. And I, for one, welcome that.